Good afternoon, and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Rick Dunham. I'm White House correspondent for Business Week magazine and the president of the National Press Club. I'd like to welcome club members and their guests in the audience today, as well as those of you watching on C-SPAN or listening live on National Public Radio. The video archive of today's luncheon is provided by Connect Live and is available to members only through the National Press Club website at www.press.org. Press Club members also can access free transcripts of our luncheons at our website. Non-members may purchase transcripts, audio or videotapes by calling 888-343-1940. And for more information about joining the Press Club, the few reporters in here who are not yet members of the Press Club, you can contact us at 202-662-7511. Before introducing our head table, I would like to remind the audience of some future speakers. Tomorrow, our guest will be former U.S. Senator Sam Nunn, the co-chairman and CEO of the Nuclear Threat Initiative. On Tuesday, March 15th, 1 month before the dreaded tax day, Mark Everson, the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, will address our members. And on Friday, March 18th, our speaker will be LeVar Burton, actor and spokesperson for the Children's Miracle Network. And coming up in April, our guests will include Jane Fonda and Senator Barack Obama. If you have any questions for our speaker, please write them on the cards provided at your table and pass them up to me. I'll ask as many as time permits. I'd now like to introduce our head table guests and ask them to stand briefly when their names are called. Please hold your applause until all head table guests are introduced. From your right, Jane Podesta of People magazine. Elaine Bohl, the Senior Public Information Officer of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. And without Elaine, this event would not be taking place. Thank you so much, Elaine. Stephen Labaton of the New York Times and co-chair of the National Press Club's Freedom of the Press Committee. Taylor Kennedy of National Geographic. John Fredrickson, coordinator of external affairs for the UN Refugee Agency and guest of our speaker. Bob Cardin of Cardin Communications and the Speakers Committee member who coordinated today's lunch. Thanks, Bob. Kalude Doherty, the regional rep of the UN Refugee Agency and a guest of our speaker. Bill McCarran, the president of U.S. Newswire and chairman of the Press Club Speakers Committee. Skipping over our speaker, Allison Bethel of the Detroit News and National Press Club board member, also the winner of the President's Club Award for recruiting more new Press Club members than any other individual in the past year. Thank you very much, Allison. Next, Anna Iannuzzo of ANSA. Elizabeth Dallum, Protection Officer of the UN Refugee Agency. Casper Zeuthen of Yomiuri Shimbun, Mark Hamrick, AP Broadcast and Vice Chair of the National Press Club Board of Governors, and Mark Bueno of Dow Jones, a member of the National Press Club President's Task Force on the Arts. Great. Throughout my year as National Press Club President, we will be hosting well-known public figures speaking on important policy topics, both domestic and international. That's why we're delighted today to welcome Angelina Jolie, the Goodwill Ambassador for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. All of you know Ms. Jolie as an Academy Award-winning actress whose work includes Girl Interrupted, for which she won an Oscar, Golden Globe, Screen Actors Guild Award, and many, many more. Gia and George Wallace, for which she also received Golden Globes. Foxfire, Bone Collector, I could go on, and upcoming Mr. and Mrs. Smith. But as big a star as she is, Ms. Jolie is not here to talk about her movie career, but about a subject very close to her heart, the plight of the world's estimated 17 million refugees. Since the summer of 2001, Ms. Jolie has traveled with the UN Refugee Agency to some of the most remote and desolate regions on the planet, meeting refugees in Sudan's Darfur region, Sierra Leone, Cote d'Ivoire, Kosovo, and many other places. Her moving and exceptionally well-written field visit journal from Darfur is available on the UN Refugee Agency website at unhcr.org. She's also written a book about her work, Notes from My Travels, Visits with Refugees in Africa, Cambodia, Pakistan, and Ecuador. It sounds like our speaker qualifies for National Press Club membership. She's also producing A Moment in Time, a documentary for which she sent cameras and celebrities such as Jude Law and Bai Ling to 38 locations around the world. When it comes to the plight of refugees, she has reached out to speak truth to power around the globe. Recently at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, where she informed participants ranging from Bill Gates to my colleagues at Business Week. In October 2003, Ms. Jolie was given the first UNCA Citizen of the World Award by the UN Correspondents Association. The award cited her efforts to bring forgotten refugee crises to the attention of the world media. Our guest is not only a dedicated advocate for refugees, but a generous donor as well, funding many UNHCR initiatives and field operations. Ms. Jolie is in Washington now to spearhead an initiative to encourage law firms throughout the country to donate more pro bono legal work to refugees and refugee issues. In her travels, Ms. Jolie realized that many children were not granted asylum or other remedies because they have no access to the U.S. legal system. Tonight, she's the featured speaker at a national video conference that will outline the legal plight of child refugees and ask law firms around the country to give more time to the cause. And tomorrow night, she and former Secretary of State Colin Powell are being presented with a humanitarian award by the Kuwaiti Foundation, which has raised more than $1 million for Iraqi refugees. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Angelina Jolie.
Oh, God. Thank you for that amazing introduction. First of all, thank you so much for allowing me to be here. And please help me. Maybe in a few minutes we'll stop because I'm nervous and I'll forget what I'm saying if this continues with the pictures. But thank you so much for allowing me to be here. Let me first, I'd just like to mention, take this opportunity, an important thing that's happening in Congress today. Later this afternoon, the House Appropriations Committee is voting on an emergency bill to provide needed assistance to victims of the tsunami, as well as displaced persons in Sudan and other parts of Africa. And I believe it is a very important bill. And I hear that Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr. is pushing for an amendment to restore the $150 million in food assistance to Sudan that had originally been asked for by the president. He's also proposing an additional $100 million of humanitarian assistance for African emergencies. So I think it's very important, and I hope that the House committee does agree to it. Back to why we're here. Thank you. For the last 4 years, I have met with refugees in Africa, Southeast Asia, South America, and most recently in Darfur, Sudan. Refugees are some of the most amazing people, and especially the children. Many of them have seen their families murdered in front of them. They've lost their homes. They've been physically attacked themselves. And yet, despite all of this, somehow, their spirits are unbelievably unbroken. And most people don't realize that there are over 50 million people in the world who've had to flee their homes, and half of them are children. So why are we here today? 2 years ago, I learned that every year thousands of these children cross into the U.S. alone, without a parent or a guardian. And they come from all over the world, from China, Ethiopia, Haiti, Guatemala, Sri Lanka, from everywhere. They're fleeing abuse, poverty, persecution. Many of them have been trafficked, kidnapped, and trafficked into the United States, and they're working in sweatshops or prostitution rings. They cross into our border, and they declare, "I'm in fear for my life." And we lock them in centers, and despite their very vulnerable situation, these children must then go to immigration hearings alone. They are not provided with any legal assistance to help them. I've been to immigration court. I can hardly understand it. I can't believe that any of us would expect that it's reasonable to send a child to face this by themselves. I actually think it's cruel. I strongly support a bill called the Unaccompanied Alien Children Child Protection Act of 2005, and that would help address the critical needs these children have for lawyers. I know how difficult it is to get legislation passed, but these children can't wait. So, to try to meet the legal needs of these children sooner than later, we have established the National Center for Refugee and Immigrant Children. This center will be run by the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants and the American Immigration Lawyers Association. The center will recruit lawyers from around the country to donate their time to help these children. So at this point, I would like to ask the directors of these two agencies to please stand and be recognized. I think. I'm sure if you have any questions about how the center will operate, I'm sure they would love to speak to you, and I advise you to please do that. I'm also pleased to announce that a number of law firms have already committed to taking on a number of cases pro bono, and I'd like to take this opportunity to mention them. Holland and Knight, Fried Frank, Dorsey and Whitney, Morgan Lewis, Latham and Watkins, Jenkins and Gilchrist, Fulbright and Jawowski, Powell and Goldstein, Fager and Benson, Maggio and Qatar, Spring and Spalding. We're all very excited, and really what their commitment means is that already at least 100 kids will have some help and support through this process. So it's amazing. You can almost imagine the faces of the kids, and it's really exciting. So the point of all of this is that when children cross into this country alone and they're scared, we must hear them out before we make a choice to either allow them asylum in this country or to send them away. And it's unethical not to listen to these children. And for those of you who say we do, I say we don't, because without legal representation, we are sending children to court to represent themselves in a language that most of them don't even understand, and expecting them to recall accounts so frightening and humiliating that they wouldn't want to tell anyone, let alone a room full of strangers. If you can imagine a boy who's been sexually trafficked being asked to explain in detail what's been done to him, or a 12-year-old girl whose parents were shot in front of her, asking her to prove it and recall every detail over and over and over again. And all we're asking is for somebody to just hold their hands through this really scary time. These are children, and I have to believe that in this country, we don't turn our back on innocent children. And all we're pushing for is to give them a chance to be properly heard. And you'd all want that for your children. I certainly would want it for mine. So thank you very much for listening today, and I'm excited to talk with everybody and continue to find ways to help these kids. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We have a large number of questions that range from refugee kids in the United States to Catherine the Great in Russia. But let me start out with something that you were just talking about. What do you think will persuade Congressman Sensenbrenner to pass the Unaccompanied Alien Child Protection Act in the House?
God, I'm going to beg him right now. I think he's a smart man, and he's got to know that at the end of the day, he's certainly smart enough to understand that at the end of the day, it's smart for governments. It's smart for our own government. You know, if you have a caseload of children, and you're saying, you want to get through these cases, and you want to know who's going to go back, who's going to stay, how many our prisons are going to get full of all these cases and children. In order to deal with it, you need this assistance to move it forward. For the judges to understand the cases, for us to be able to understand these kids, and whether we send them back, we don't, we know who's, it simply makes sense. So I think he's got to be smart enough to understand that, if we can't just simply appeal to him on a humanitarian level.
Do you think the government should be funding the National Center for Refugee and Immigrant Children, or is this something for the private sector?
This might, I'm going to ask John Frederickson to come up, but I do think, I mean, what we're talking about is a lot of pro bono work as well, so, yeah, please come.
I mean, clearly this is an effort for both the private and the governmental sectors. The bill that Angelina referred to on the Hill, sponsored by Senator Feinstein and Senator Brownback, does provide for the capacity of the government to help these pro bono organizations and law firms to get involved. So it doesn't provide for direct legal representation per se, which is an issue in the law, but it does provide some governmental assistance to make this possible for people to get engaged, and that's what we're seeking for.
Someone in the audience says, I hear that the Department of Homeland Security separates parents from their children and jails the parents in detention facilities apart from their children. Have you seen this, and what is UNHCR's position on the separation of families?
Well, I'll speak for myself and not UNHCR. I think I think it's something we really need to address. I think it's cruel. I'll tell you a story. When I went to Arizona recently, I went to visit Kids First. I went to a shelter, and I met this young girl, and like the children we've just been speaking about, that they're unaccompanied, and I was really confused because she was so alone and so scared, and I found out she did have a parent, but her parent was locked in a prison facility far away. And then later that day, I met that parent and told her that I had seen her daughter, and she broke down hysterically crying. And these two probably traveled through, and God knows what happened to them in their countries, so horrible we can't even imagine. Then they travel here, then they're separated. So just to think about what that does to a kid's mind, what that does to them emotionally, what that does to, it's just that much more damaging. So I think there's got to be a better solution. I do think we need to address it, and yes.
Well, you've seen around the world a lot of refugee resettlement and what the UN Office of Refugee Resettlement does. How do you compare the UN Office of Refugee Resettlement with what the IRS does at the U.S. borders?
The INS?
Yeah.
The INS?
Immigration.
Well, I know, and then maybe I'm going to ask Elizabeth to help me to explain this better. I know there's been a great, in the last year, there's been a great shift from when these kids come in. Used to be just the INS handling them, and it has been handed over to the ORR, and there has been a lot that has been addressed for these children. Their accommodations, their where they're living, whether it looks like a prison or whether it's more of a shelter for them, and that's been a big deal. And I think we should all be very vocal about how grateful we are for that step forward for these kids, and that's a positive step between the INS and ORR. But Elizabeth, if there's anything else?
Perfect answer.
Okay, thank you.
How do you feel about the Department of Homeland Security's policy of fitting asylum seekers with ankle bracelets to track their movements in the United States?
Jesus. Fucking hell. I'll be honest, it's the first I've heard that, and it's God. I just, to be honest, I wish we lived in a world when people go, every time I've seen people cross into a country, I've seen refugees, and I know the process, especially if we've got lawyers and judges looking at these cases, they're working very hard to separate who's really going to get asylum and who is sent back. And if you have received asylum in this country, you have had to prove something so horrible. There is a reason why you are here, and you have been through something that, so then to be further treated like a criminal, I just can't imagine that's at all fair or decent. I know that this country's scared right now, and we're all on, it's a lot of talk about terror, but that's happening in a lot of other countries, and there are things in other countries where they can't clean up, so we can move on, and we can start to address terror as if it's something we're going to fight overseas, and other people are addressing it daily in their homes, in their neighborhoods. So I think it's easy for us to try to address things and say we're scared here, but we've got to be a little more careful with human beings' lives and how they must feel when they go through something like that.
Well, we have several questions from reporters from around the world on your impressions of various refugee situations. One asks about the Middle East, your impressions of the refugee situation in the Middle East. Another wants to know about your trip to Chad and the people you met there, and you answered the third already about Arizona.
Chad, I went to Chad quite a few months ago, and then most recently I went into Darfur when I was finally allowed to go into Darfur. That's I think for most, it's such a complicated situation. I've gone into so many refugee camps or borders, and it's so obvious what the enemy is and what the needs are, and this is a really difficult situation. When I saw people in Chad and I realized that they were the lucky ones, even though the situation in the camp was so hard, and they were looking for water, and everybody was in a panic to get them from one place to another and get enough food and enough care for the kids. But then you realize at least we knew where they were, and everybody could start to give them some assistance. It was the million people estimated, if not more, that were lost inside Darfur. Then it's open, we can get inside Darfur, and I thought, great, we can, everybody can get to these people, we can understand what the needs are. I went inside Darfur, and I saw a lot of very emotional, very frustrated aid workers who could not move and properly get to the people. And then when they could get to the people, they were concerned about what they would give the people, since they were still living amongst the people that had hurt them. I met a group of kids, and while I was saying to them, and then their clothes were falling off them, they had no change of clothes, they had medical issues that clearly needed to be treated. And I'd say, well, can't you go to the medical, no, the Janjaweed are there. Can you tell me about what's happened? And while I was talking to them, 2 Janjaweed men walked by with guns, and all the kids stopped talking and got really scared and refused to speak to me anymore. So this idea of, are we really getting in there to understand what's going on, and how are we really going to help them, is really complicated. And I feel for certainly for the people there, and also for the people there who are trying to help them, because I think we need to do something bigger with that situation. And I'm not, I'm not a politician. I don't know the perfect answer, but I know that to simply be sending a little bit of aid, or occasionally talking about them, or saying, is it genocide? Is it like Rwanda? It's gross human rights violations, and people are dying every day. So we've got to do something more than we're doing right now.
Yeah, we can talk about the Middle East for a minute, first the refugees in the Middle East, but we also got another question about Lebanon, saying you spent last Christmas with refugees and the UNHCR staff in Lebanon. What are your thoughts about the recent assassination of former Prime Minister Hariri, and what impact do you think his assassination, what has it had on you, and what do you think it will on the work in Lebanon?
Again, I'm always so nervous answering these questions, because I feel like I come from a place from my heart and my gut, and I'm not the best at analyzing these situations. But I'll tell you that when I was there for Christmas with my son, I found it so beautiful that we could see Christmas trees next to mosques, and spend time with all families and all different backgrounds and everything. And you'd drive down the street and see bullets on either side. You see, God, these people were just fighting and trying to kill each other, and now they're friends, and they're trying to rebuild, and they're celebrating together. I thought, this is what a great example for this part of the world. So for this to happen, it just makes me feel like they were getting so close to something, and what I don't understand exactly what led to it. I don't know what's happening. I don't understand what's happening now, but I'm in fear of how it's going to affect Lebanon and the Lebanese people, and what's going to happen to them, because they were so close to something so peaceful and beautiful. I felt when I was there with my kid.
Now, not to get too much into world politics here, but there's an interesting question about the rumors that Bono of U2 is being considered to head up the World Bank. So, I don't know if you've worked with him at all on refugee issues, but first, do you think he'd be a good person for that? And secondly, has your work for UNHCR inspired you to consider either running for an office or another position within the UN?
I think I got too many skeletons in my closet for politics, but I think I have met Bono, and I think he's a great guy, great family man, great, and really genuinely has such passion to do good things. So I think, my choice for the World Bank, I don't know, can you say these things? I guess you say it in this room and it gets out there. Would be Colin Powell. So that's my choice.
So, well, I'll go from Colin Powell to one of his former deputies. We have more questions on John Bolton than any other subject today, since that's in the news as the the president's designee as new UN ambassador. Do you have any views on John Bolton's nomination, and do you think that John Bolton at the UN, after John Negroponte and John Danforth, would change the U.S. approach to the UN?
I really don't know. I don't know enough. I mean, I've started to watch and read things I can about him, but I can't really form an opinion. I can only hope that he's somebody who would be truly, because what we need is somebody who is truly there, not to judge the UN, but to try to really find the best way to make it better and to work with it and make the US and UN relations better, as opposed to just coming at it with criticism. So I'm hoping that that's who he is.
There are a couple of questions about Beyond Borders. First, do you think Beyond Borders could be used for educational purposes? And second, will you be producing, acting, writing in more awareness programs like Beyond Borders?
I never know what's we certainly did that film because we loved it and we thought it said something. I think if people wanted to show it and use it as education, that would be wonderful, but everybody has a different opinion about those things. And I did recently produce, and I've never spoken about this, I feel, but a documentary, and I still don't know what it is yet. I'm editing it, but it was a moment in the world, and it was the idea was to try to get a glimpse of our world at one time. So we sent 38 crews around the world, and from everywhere from war zones, refugee camps, met with landmine victims, but also families in Middle America, and just to get a sense of what maybe this world looks like, and if people could at least wake up and start to think that way. But I'm editing it now, and I don't know what it's going to turn out to be, and if anybody will watch it.
Beyond your own efforts, how do you think the movie industry has done? Has it played a positive role in publicizing the plight of refugees, and specifically, what do you think Hotel Rwanda has done for the issue?
Yeah, well, I absolutely loved Hotel Rwanda. I think it's the most important film that came out this year. And I know Don Cheadle has recently been to Darfur, and he's become very, very active. And I think he's even working with Paul Rusesabagina, who Hotel Rwanda is about, on something that the campaign, I believe, is even called Hotel Darfur. So he continues, not just with the film, they both are continuing to be extremely active because they see the parallels. There's also a beautiful film, I Am David, that was about a refugee boy. But certainly, I would love it if you know, I read scripts all the time, and most of them don't have very much to say, and I've done some of those. But I wish there were more, and I also wish that audiences wanted to see those films, because often films are made for what audiences want, and audiences don't seem to be rushing to theaters often to see really, really heavy things. But hopefully we can change that and do more.
What do you think the United States, the United Nations, and other leading powers could do to prevent future genocides like was portrayed in Hotel Rwanda? And what can they do for the plight of refugees?
I think this is it's a bigger question. I've recently traveled to Ethiopia with Jeffrey Sachs, and I've been learning about the Millennium Development Goals. And I know many people think they're very, very ambitious, and I believe they are, but I think they're also possible. The reason I bring those up is because the idea of how much money, when I started to look at statistics and how much money we send in aid and after the fact, and let's fix it with a war, you know, or there's this many refugees have fled across the border, or this war's broken out, or these people are fighting over resources. I think we all need to be focusing on helping these people to be able to control their own resources, have proper quality of lives, understand their soil, understand their school for their children, understand all of these things, so there will be simply less conflict in the world, and therefore less refugees and less need for food aid, and we can start just investing in people and their infrastructures, and I think that's what we should all be, and all governments should be focusing on now.
The recent tsunami was universally described as a huge tragedy, and it galvanized actions from governments and citizens around the world. What does it take to move nations and people to act, whether it is a natural disaster or a human disaster?
Well, I think the press can help. It's what you focus on that helps the people to know what they should be believing is important and should be paying attention to. I think the thing we should all, that I'm certainly very aware of is the tsunami was something that was nothing, you know, it's not man-made. It's something that happened, something that we could do nothing about to prevent these other things we're speaking about, where millions of people are dying. We can stop them. They're man-made. You know, why are we spending so much? Why don't we completely understand that? And the numbers of kids that die, I don't know, I think it was the world, you probably know more than I do about the number of people that died in the tsunami. That number is a matter of weeks of people who die of hunger. So, you know, that's what we need to think of.
Right. How do we do, or what can be done to improve conditions in the countries from which refugees are fleeing? Is there a way to deal with the issues before the refugee situation is created, particularly if it's economic rather than political, or can we just treat the symptom after the people have fled the countries?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and then back to rebuilding infrastructure and focusing on the countries before they break apart into you know, such conflict and such desperation. So absolutely. I mean, I'm trying to do that when Cambodia and then you know, the families that I work with and around the world. I think you know, when I went, for example, with the Millennium Development Goals people, we went to one village and they had malariologists, soil experts, people who understood solar power, economists, everybody, and they could flood that area and walk around and understand and have a lot of answers to really do it from the ground up, as opposed to, I think now we often, you know, send one person in to maybe address one issue or somebody else, or but we're not all working coordinated. That's for UN agencies and governments and NGOs, and the more we can work together to really do things from the ground up is the answer, I believe.
We have several questions about China and North Korea, which is, I guess we could say, an emerging refugee issue. One person asked, what do you think about China turning back North Korean refugees to North Korea, knowing that they are sending them to prison camps and or death sentences?
I'm educating myself on that now and hoping to take a trip to visit them. So hopefully maybe I'll be able to answer that better and more publicly in the months to come. But I think it's something we all must clearly pay attention to.
There are a couple of questions about lawyers and the initiative that you are in town to work on. One came in by email from London asking, once the children would gain asylum, if they have the benefit of the lawyers, what extra rights would you like to see them have once they have gained asylum, rather than just being in a country and then being all alone? Is there anything else that we need to do for them?
That you might want to also add in. I think I'm sure guardians and helping them to understand. It's like most refugees that come here. It's helping them, like the Lost Boys of Sudan. I think we all know about them. We know they first came. They didn't understand doorknobs. They didn't understand certain basic. There's lots of things to help somebody learn about a new country, certainly a kid. And also I think we know children at school, there's going to be a lot of you know, cruelty and judgment, and I think something we should be doing also anyway is really looking at our school systems and how best to get our teachers you know, explaining to kids about other cultures, other heroes in other countries, and getting the kids to start to speak about their differences, opposed to just, we're all American now and let's ignore them. So I think that's something that would help the children coming in. But I think we also need to look at the rights for children born in this country, which need some help as well. Okay.
For those of us who are not lawyers, what would you recommend that we do to help this cause?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, and I mean, I'm having the same. I wish I was, because I could do more. Visit the children if you can. I think a lot of kids just simply are children here alone. I know certainly paying attention and making people aware, or pressing law firms to donate their time. But if you personally wanted to just, I'm sure, spend time with these kids, bring them teddy bears, listen to them, you know, just be a friend. They're alone, so there are many things you could do. Make friends with them. I help them out.
We have a couple of questions about the National Legal Resource Center. Was there anything, any specific moment or event or series of events that inspired you to donate to the National Legal Resource Center for aiding unaccompanied children seeking asylum? And did your experience with adopting your son Maddox have any impact on your decision to do this?
I'm sure it did at some point, because my son's country, the highest number of children trafficked from Cambodia are trafficked for begging. So when I was last in Thailand, and you'd realize that all the kids in the street, they don't speak Thai, they speak Khmer. And they were probably trucked out that morning by somebody to, so clearly, you know, I'm aware of these kids and think my son could easily have been one. Really I went to visit Arizona, and I was with John and Elizabeth, and we had been speaking to different people on the Hill about this bill, and I just couldn't understand how this was happening to these kids. It made me, I was sick about it, and then we just thought, well, this is crazy. We all need to start working together, and who are the best people and who are already doing everything they can to help these kids, and let's find them, let's pull together, and let's come up with some idea to do something substantial today. So that's really kind of what came out of it.
Do you plan to or hope to adopt more children?
Yes, absolutely. My son's in love with Africa, so he's been asking for an African brother or sister.
Now, we know about the accuracy of news media reports, but one question came in and said, recent media reports said you had tried to adopt a Russian orphan and were denied permission. Is that true? And do you have any views on the Russian orphanage system, which now has 700,000 orphans, more than following World War II?
No, I didn't realize that. I wasn't adopted. I'm always, by the way, almost any country I go to, I'm prepared to adopt. But I wasn't at that time. I went for humanitarian reasons, and I went to visit the children in Beslan. It was the 40-day anniversary, and I went to the hospital, and I also went to orphanages, and no, I wasn't denied any kind of adoption. But then when I saw a picture of this kid, which I didn't know, and thought, God, that's amazing, they would do that, and I still wonder how that kid is and where that. If somehow the press did something with this unknown child, and how his life's been affected by that. So that's just another example of how the press needs to be so careful, because, what does that mean for his future if he's been so publicly, turned into some story that there's nothing to it, but now he's out there, and who is he? And this little kid.
What motivated you in 2001 to get involved with the refugee issue, and how did it come about that you became Goodwill ambassador? I went to shoot a film in Cambodia, and it was the first time. I grew up in the States. I thought I had a pretty good education. I did, but I really didn't. I was not educated about other countries and other histories properly, I believe, as many of our countries are not. And I went to Cambodia, and I was shocked. I didn't understand. They said, you can't shoot over there, and please don't walk over there because there are landmines, and then this is what a refugee is, and these people that they've all returned from this area, and this is, yes, the prisons, and it was very clear to me that there was a lot about this world that I didn't know, and I felt really ashamed and ignorant that I didn't, and that I had to start educating myself. And I had also been following what was going on in Sierra Leone at that time when I was in England, and then I came back to the States, and I couldn't follow it as well. So I called. I got a bunch of books on every different NGO and every different UN agency, and I read the chapter on UNHCR, and there was 20 million people were refugees, and I thought, what year is this? That's got to be the most impossible. That's what. And then realized, and I called Washington and said, you're going to think I'm completely crazy, but I'm an actress, and I'd just like to learn, and can you help me? And I went up to Washington and spoke with them for quite a long time, and then a few weeks later I was in Sierra Leone, and I traveled with UNHCR for about a year, learning about them and them learning about me before we agreed to work together and speak about it, and it just changed my life. Well, in fact, that leads into the next question, which is, how did the humanitarian work alter your perspective on life?
It's given, I think at the end of the day, we're all alive to get to know ourselves and each other better and to be of some use in this world. And when I was growing up, I felt I didn't really feel very good about myself. I was, and later came to realize that it was because I really was not of use to others. So it focused me on life, and also just, I met refugees and these people that had gone through so much, and had woken up, in my own, just worried about, traffic or my family or some stupid job or something, and then you get to a place and you realize how lucky we all are, and I since have not complained about anything stupid or superficial since, and I'm very, very aware of what should be our priorities, and they're anyway.
Can you talk a little about activism in Hollywood? Do your contemporaries really care? Is there Hollywood in general, and then your generation of stars in Hollywood, and who do you have a lot of respect for the kinds of things they're doing for humanitarian causes?
God, I do think a lot of the people in the film business are just simply haven't traveled. They just don't know, and I do believe they're good people at heart, many of them. And if they were more aware, they'd do more. I kind of have to believe that. There are a lot of good people. You asked me different people I know. I don't actually know many. We don't kind of get together, and so. But I do think Bono's been doing some great things, and yeah, quite a few other actors are recently. Brad Pitt went to Ethiopia, and I know when I was doing the documentary, and I'd asked people would they go to Chad, this young kid Ryan Gosling. I said yes, I'd love to learn, and someone else went to Kosovo, and someone else went, and they all came back emotional and different, and so yeah, I do think they have it in them, and they will do more, and especially if they're encouraged and not criticized when they first take that step, because I think that often happens in the press. We see somebody do something, and immediately it's, just they shot down, so they get shy and go back inside, so maybe a little encouragement would help.
Next question is one I know my Business Week editors would like me to answer. That is, how do you balance your day job with your extracurricular activities?
It's become a very fuzzy line as which is which now, because I haven't actually worked for the last few months, and I'm having more trouble going to. I think this has kind of taken over my life more than anything else, and I'm very happy about that. So hopefully I'll be doing a little less film work and a little more of this. For now, sorry. But end of the day, I'm a mom, and that's my life. So. Last night I was running around trying to do things, and my son was spilling food all over my speeches, and and somehow we cleaned it up, and I'm here. So, but that's I think you find balance when you're happy and you're focused on the things you really care about, and so it's become it's a joy.
There were a few questions that slipped in about your film career. I was wondering what you're most proud of that you have done. I mean, you've won Academy Awards, many others. What do you like most of what you have done so far?
Oh my God, I'm really I don't watch my own films. I'm a terrible judge of my. Recently I did an animated film, and my son thinks I'm cool, so that was. But the interesting thing is, I was saying earlier that I've done films that in this business are had some good critique, and some have been completely panned as crazy, like Tomb Raider films are not considered these really deep films, but I can go to the middle of Asia and Africa and make a little kid smile because he recognized it, and so they're my favorites. And that's.
Someone wanted to know about Catherine the Great and what made you take that role, and if you enjoy playing a historically misunderstood character.
It's extremely misunderstood because I'm actually not playing.
Oh, no.
No, it's it's a funny there are so many bizarre rumors. I've been fighting that one for a long time. I don't know where that came from, but I'm not playing her. I'm sure she's fascinating, and I'd love to play her, but I'm not as of yet.
So, well, we know about believing everything you read in the papers. Have you ever considered just going and doing a movie, fiction movie about the kinds of things that you're working on on refugees, or do you think the documentary route and the book route is the best way to highlight it?
I think for now, certainly documentaries are, because I think there's nothing more powerful. You can't recreate in a film what these people and these children are really like. So the real situations, I think, are just much more powerful, and so probably documentaries.
Now we have various questions about what's going on at the U.S. borders. If I can swing back over there, is there anything else that you would like to see the U.S. government do or Congress do other than the legislation that we discussed that you're going over to Capitol Hill to talk about? Are there any other priorities that you think either the federal government or Congress can adopt that would make a difference with refugees at the U.S. borders?
I'm sure there are actually many different things, but what I've learned visiting Washington a few times is you have to stay very focused on at least one thing at a time and push it through. So yeah, my mind is on lots of different things I've become aware of, and I will become more vocal on. But as of now, I'm just going to keep shouting this one to make sure it goes through.
I mean, other than the issue that we touched on with North Korea, are there other forgotten refugee problems that haven't gotten a lot of attention that you'd like to shine a little bit of the spotlight on? Are there areas in the world that you think are underreported with the problems of the plight of refugees?
There are so many. UNHCR works in over 110 countries. So pretty much everywhere in the world. Aware of the Congo because I've been there quite a few times, and I know it's been exploding again, and worried about that situation. I'm worried about the situation in Burma, or Myanmar, to be politically correct. But the people inside, the internally displaced persons inside that area, I'm very worried about them, and I think none of us really know what's going on. And I'm afraid, I don't want it to be like the situation in Cambodia where we discovered too late how many lives were lost and how horrible it was. And I do think that's what's going on inside there. Yeah, southern Sudan. So, and that's more internally displaced. But Uganda, there are many. Child soldiers is something that I think, and you asked earlier if there's going to be something to address that, because I mentioned Uganda, that is something that I think, I'll later focus on.
What are the common threads you see with children that you meet, refugee children around the world, and how are there differences when you are in Cambodia or in Africa or in Europe with Kosovo? I mean, what are the similarities and what are the stark differences that you may see from situation to situation?
The thing is, it might sound cliche, the kids are the same everywhere. The kids, if they're young kids, they're still really smiling and happy because they don't understand where they are. They're not quite aware of how much they're missing. The thing that was interesting as I've traveled is that, and we know how kids are in this country. You ask them getting ready to go to school, and they kind of fight you, and they don't want to go. And across the world in refugee camps, they're begging to get a chance to go to school. They work really, really hard. They're like little adults. They've been through so much, and then you ask them what they want to be, and they say, I want to be a doctor because I want to help my people. I want to be an architect because I want to rebuild my country. Unfortunately, they're very, very focused on the needs, on survival. But because of that, they've become remarkable, strong, smart, clear, good people, a lot of them. And I think if we give them the right guidance young, then they will continue to grow in a positive direction. I think if we don't aid them by the time they're 19, 20, and they've seen a lot of death and they've had no opportunities, then you start to worry about if they've developed and gone in a more angry place, and we don't want that to happen, and it doesn't happen if we take care of them as they're growing up.
I mean, how have you seen your son grow and change from the time you met him as a refugee to now someone who has had some familiarity with Western culture and I can't say Hollywood life is sort of average American life, but with life in the West?
Well, we travel. I'm going to make a point. I think the best education I can give him is to just show him the world as I know it, as I see it now, which is to keep traveling. So he's got 2 passports, and he spends most of his time in other countries. We have a home in Cambodia. He loves Asia, Africa, and we actually don't. I don't bring him to a lot of. He does come to set and he comes to work with me, but you also, point to Africa and he'll say, "Oh, mommy goes there," or he knows. He's very aware. He understands. We have landmine victims are our neighbors in Cambodia, and he understands what that is, and he understands that there are kids that don't have any food or don't have any parents and he hasn't understood that he was one of them yet. But recently we went to Ethiopia and we went to a market, and he's 3.5, and he was just walking around, no other tourists, and he was just walking around talking to everybody and sitting on their laps, and then I thought, that's great. It's that he's learned the most important thing. He doesn't see a difference. He's enjoying these people, and he's so that's. I think.
You were in at least one film that dealt with modern politics, Wallace. I was wondering if there are any figures out there in the current world, that in the contemporary political world, you think would be you would be interested in playing down the road, or if you think there are any larger than life figures out there you think would be good subjects.
Her, no. We were chatting earlier. No, I'll let you guys decide that one. I couldn't possibly see myself like that, so no.
So, looking back over the past decade, there's been a big change in Hollywood, big change in the media in terms of cable and where people go for movies, where they go for entertainment. Do you think we're going to see more and more people watching at home? Do you think the movies that you did for HBO are a wave of the future, or do you think we're going to have sort of parallel worlds with the big screen movies and people who watch on the small screen at home?
I don't know if I understand the combination of technologies. You mean like yeah, I mean, I'm really terrible at all that stuff. I'm terrible about understanding theaters and box office and things and how. But I do think it's interesting that you can, you don't have to go to the theater and you can sit at home, rent a movie. I think it makes all films more accessible to people, and I think that's great. But I don't know. I think it's best when you're in the business never to think about that side of it and just work.
Before we ask the final question, I'd like to thank you for being here today and present you with 2 souvenirs of your appearance. One is the coveted National Press Club mug.
Hey. Thank you very much.
And a certificate of appreciation, which I'm sure will not quite go up there next to the Academy Award, but is suitably framed.
Thank you so much.
And now the final question. One of our inquiring international correspondents asks, did you choose to go by the name Jolie because it means beautiful in French, or I will add, because that was your middle name at birth?
Wow, an easy question. Yeah, that was my mom, Angelina Jolie, she was hoping for a pretty angel. That's what it meant, and got stuck with a bit of a wild child. But I never actually liked Jolie because of what it meant. It always made me but now it's my son's name, so it's ours, and it's cool, and I like it. So thanks, Mom.
Great, thank you very much. I'd like to thank all of you for coming today. I'd also like to thank National Press Club staff members Melinda Cook, Pat Nelson, Joanne Booz, and Howard Rothman for organizing today's lunch. Also, thanks as always to the NPC Library for its research. We're adjourned.
Thank you very much. It was lovely. It was great. Thank you, everybody. Thanks a lot. Bye. Thank you very much. Great job.
Go for it, Jasmine.
That was a good one.
There you go.
No, I think so.
Yeah. Usually it's the opposite.
I think my son goes, nope.
Yeah.
A pleasure meeting you.
Did I do that? Yeah.
See you later, Rick. There.
Good job, sir. You did a good job.
Thank you.
Well, and thanks for asking the posing the question.
Here, Rick. Okay. We'll see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good luck in all the work.
And now,
Should I have dessert?
yeah, go for it. Very cool. You probably got my email last night or this morning.
Yeah, again, I'm flexible. All head table guests are introduced. From your right, Jane Podesta of People magazine. Elaine Bowl, the Senior Public Information Officer of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. And without Elaine, this event would not be taking place. Thank you so much, Elaine. Stephen Labaton of the New York Times and co-chair of the National Press Club's Freedom of the Press Committee. Taylor Kennedy of National Geographic. John Fredrickson, Coordinator of External Affairs for the UN Refugee Agency and guest of our speaker. Bob Carden of Carden Communications and the Speakers Committee member who coordinated today's lunch. Thanks, Bob. Kalude Doherty, the regional rep of the UN Refugee Agency and a guest of our speaker. Bill McCarran, the president of US Newswire and chairman of the Press Club Speakers Committee. Skipping over our speaker, Allison Bethel of the Detroit News and National Press Club board member, also the winner of the President's Club Award for recruiting more new Press Club members than any other individual in the past year. Thank you very much, Allison. Next, Anna Iannuzzo of ANSA, Elizabeth Dallum, Protection Officer of the UN Refugee Agency, Casper Zoythen of Yomiuri Shimbun, Mark Hamrick, AP Broadcast and Vice Chair of the National Press Club Board of Governors, and Mark Bueno of Dow Jones, a member of the National Press Club President's Task Force on the Arts. Great. Throughout my year as National Press Club President, we will be hosting well-known public figures speaking on important policy topics, both domestic and international. That's why we're delighted today to welcome Angelina Jolie, the Goodwill Ambassador for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. All of you know Ms. Jolie as an Academy Award-winning actress whose work includes Girl Interrupted, for which she won an Oscar, Golden Globe, Screen Actors Guild Award, and many, many more. Gia and George Wallace, for which she also received Golden Globes. Foxfire, Bone Collector, I could go on, and upcoming Mr. and Mrs. Smith. But as big a star as she is, Ms. Jolie is not here to talk about her movie career, but about a subject very close to her heart, the plight of the world's estimated 17 million refugees. Since the summer of 2001, Ms. Jolie has traveled with the UN Refugee Agency to some of the most remote and desolate regions on the planet, meeting refugees in Sudan's Darfur region, Sierra Leone, Cote d'Ivoire, Kosovo, and many other places. Her moving and exceptionally well-written field visit journal from Darfur is available on the UN Refugee Agency website at unhcr.org. She's also written a book about her work, Notes from My Travels, Visits with Refugees in Africa, Cambodia, Pakistan, and Ecuador. It sounds like our speaker qualifies for National Press Club membership. She's also producing A Moment in Time, a documentary for which she sent cameras and celebrities such as Jude Law and Bai Ling to 38 locations around the world. When it comes to the plight of refugees, she has reached out to speak truth to power around the globe. Recently at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, where she informed participants ranging from Bill Gates to my colleagues at Businessweek. In October 2003, Ms. Jolie was given the first UNCA Citizen of the World Award by the UN Correspondents Association. The award cited her efforts to bring forgotten refugee crises to the attention of the world media. Our guest is not only a dedicated advocate for refugees, but a generous donor as well, funding many UNHCR initiatives and field operations. Ms. Jolie is in Washington now to spearhead an initiative to encourage law firms throughout the country to donate more pro bono legal work to refugees and refugee issues. In her travels, Ms. Jolie realized that many children were not granted asylum or other remedies because they have no access to the U.S. legal system. Tonight, she's the featured speaker at a national video conference that will outline the legal plight of child refugees and ask law firms around the country to give more time to the cause. Good afternoon, and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Rick Dunham. I'm White House correspondent for Businessweek magazine and the president of the National Press Club. I'd like to welcome club members and their guests in the audience today, as well as those of you watching on C-SPAN or listening live on National Public Radio. The video archive of today's luncheon is provided by Connect Live and is available to members only through the National Press Club website at www.press.org. Press Club members also can access free transcripts of our luncheons at our website. Non-members may purchase transcripts, audio or videotapes by calling 888-343-1940. And for more information about joining the Press Club, the few reporters in here who are not yet members of the Press Club, you can contact us at 202-662-7511. Before introducing our head table, I would like to remind the audience of some future speakers. Tomorrow, our guest will be former U.S. Senator Sam Nunn, the co-chairman and CEO of the Nuclear Threat Initiative. On Tuesday, March 15th, 1 month before the dreaded tax day, Mark Everson, the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, will address our members. And on Friday, March 18th, our speaker will be LeVar Burton, actor and spokesperson for the Children's Miracle Network. And coming up in April, our guests will include Jane Fonda and Senator Barack Obama. If you have any questions for our speaker, please write them on the cards provided at your table and pass them up to me. I'll ask as many as time permits. I'd now like to introduce our head table guests and ask them to stand briefly when their names are called. Please hold your applause until... And tomorrow night, she and former Secretary of State Colin Powell are being presented with a humanitarian award by the Kuwaiti Foundation, which has raised more than $1 million for Iraqi refugees. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Angelina Jolie.
Oh my God. Thank you for that amazing introduction. First of all, thank you so much for allowing me to be here. And please help me. Maybe in a few minutes we'll stop because I'm nervous and I'll forget what I'm saying if this continues with the pictures. But thank you so much for allowing me to be here. Let me first, I'd just like to mention, take this opportunity, an important thing that's happening in Congress today. Later this afternoon, the House Appropriations Committee is voting on an emergency bill to provide needed assistance to victims of the tsunami, as well as displaced persons in Sudan and other parts of Africa. And I believe it is a very important bill. And And I hear that Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr. is pushing for an amendment to restore the $150 million in food assistance to Sudan that had originally been asked for by the president. He's also proposing an additional $100 million of humanitarian assistance for African emergencies. So I think it's very important, and I hope that the House committee does agree to it. Back to why we're here. Thank you. For the last 4 years, I have met with refugees in Africa, Southeast Asia, South America, and most recently in Darfur, Sudan. Refugees are some of the most amazing people, and especially the children. Many of them have seen their families murdered in front of them. They've lost their homes. They've been physically attacked themselves. And yet, despite all of this, somehow, their spirits are unbelievably unbroken. And most people don't realize that there are over 50 million people in the world who've had to flee their homes, and half of them are children. So why are we here today? 2 years ago, I learned that every year thousands of these children cross into the U.S. alone, without a parent or a guardian. And they come from all over the world, from China, Ethiopia, Haiti, Guatemala, Sri Lanka, from everywhere. They're fleeing abuse, poverty, persecution. Many of them have been trafficked, kidnapped, and trafficked into the United States, and they're working in sweatshops or prostitution rings. They cross into our border, and they declare, "I'm in fear for my life." And we lock them in centers, and despite their very vulnerable situation, these children must then go to immigration hearings alone. They are not provided with any legal assistance to help them. I've been to immigration court. I can hardly understand it. I can't believe that any of us would expect that it's reasonable to send a child to face this by themselves. I actually think it's cruel. I strongly support a bill called the Unaccompanied Alien Children Child Protection Act of 2005, and that would help address the critical needs these children have for lawyers. I know how difficult it is to get legislation passed, but these children can't wait. So, to try to meet the legal needs of these children sooner than later, we have established the National Center for Refugee and Immigrant Children. This center will be run by the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants and the American Immigration Lawyers Association. The center will recruit lawyers from around the country to donate their time to help these children. So at this point, I would like to ask the directors of these two agencies to please stand.